So I have a bowl all set to go with my flour in it. That's 450 grams of white bread flour. And use bread flour, don't use the regular cooking flour. And 50 grams of whole wheat flour. Over here I have a jar of sourdough starter. I fed it yesterday and then I fed it this morning, and it's pretty much doubled in size, maybe more than doubled. And I'm going to add 100 grams of that to 345 grams of water. And then I'm going to pour the whole thing into the flour. All right, so what I've got now is my water, and that was 345 grams of water. And I added to it 100 grams of sourdough starter. And now I'm just gonna pour it right into the bowl with my flour. Once that's done, you're gonna start to mix. So you just mix slowly. You wanna incorporate that water and sourdough starter into all the flour. And it's gonna take about a minute or two, so I'm not going to video the entire thing just now, but just continue to mix gently until it's all incorporated into a shaggy mess. So now I've been stirring this for about a minute or two just to get the flour incorporated with the water and the sourdough starter. I try to scrape off the edges of the bowl. And what you see is what you've got here. It's just a shaggy mass. And we're going to now let it sit for about 30 minutes and just let it continue to absorb the water. You can take off the rest of a little bit with your fingers. And I really recommend buying one of these. It's called a dough whisk, and it's just incredible. It just does the job so well. You can use it to scrape with, you can use it to fold up the sides with into a ball. It's good for so many different things. Well, now that this is done, I'm going to let it sit for half an hour. You can cover it with plastic wrap, or in this, what I do is I purchase one of these one size fits all. I just cover it. So we're going to let that rest for half an hour, and then I'll show you the next step after this. All right, so what you're looking at right now are a couple loaves of bread. This is a fig and fennel bread, and this is a black olive bread with rosemary. I'm going to give this to a neighbor. And over here, I'm going to be adding salt to the flour, to the dough that we prepared. And I use a pink Himalayan salt. You don't want to use an iodized salt that you get for cooking in the grocery stores. You want to use Himalayan salt or sea salt. I have a spray bottle here. And here's the dough that we prepared earlier in the first video. And you can see that it's absorbed all the water now and the sourdough that we added to it. So what we're going to do now is the pinch and fold method. It's really fun, gives you a chance to take out all the aggressions you might have towards your neighbor or someone you're ticked off with. But this is fun because what you're going to do is incorporate the salt into the flour. So I've got 10 grams of the Himalayan salt, and I'm just going to sprinkle it over the top. Just sprinkle it as evenly as possible over this. Now, you might say, why do you add salt? Well, bread really has no flavor on its own, unless, of course, you're adding fruit or herbs, some kind. So the salt gives it the flavor that it needs to become enjoyable. So I've sprayed that salt on there, and now I'm going to take this and I'm going to give it a few good sprays of water, as you can see. And we always have to take into consideration not to put too much water on so that the dough doesn't become too hydrated. And one other thing, you're going to see that I'm using rubber gloves. That's not necessary. The only reason I'm using it in this case is that during the half hour that this sat, I was potting up some cuttings. So I washed my hands, but still, I want to be sure my hands are clean. Always wash your hands well before you do this. And anytime you handle your dough, wash your hands with just water. Don't use soap. Just cold water, and then that prevents the damp hands prevent the fingers from sticking to the dough. So this is what we do. We're going to pinch and twist, and so that we get all that salt incorporated. Now you can see how smooth this dough is becoming just from sitting. Sometimes under the dough there's flour that's not been mixed in, so we want to scrape that up with our hands. Continue to do this. Do this process for about a minute or two until it's all well mixed in. Doesn't matter what it looks like. And it's fun because you just do it as hard as you can. Your hands are wet so it doesn't stick to the dough. If you feel like it's starting to get sticky, rinse your hands off under the sink, under the faucet. So basically I've got it done now. It's all pretty well mixed in. I just fold it up like this into sort of a ball. And I lay it back down in my bowl. I scrape any edges, anything that's on the sides into it so we don't lose anything. And then I cover it again for another half hour. And that's the next step. So I'll see you in a half an hour to show you how to do a stretch and fold. All right, so our dough has been sitting for a half an hour after we added the salt. And now we're going to begin a series of what we call stretch and folds. So we have to do 6 in total, and we do them every half hour. So be sure before you touch the dough that your hands are damp. Run them under the water, shake them off. I just did that with my gloves. And then you're just going to reach under the dough like this. Not everyone does. Some people will just start with it as it is, but I like to flip it over. So I flip the dough over. Now there's 2 different ways you can do stretch and folds. The first way is to take the bread, lift it up, fold it over. And then you're going to do that 4 times total. So you're going to lift it up, fold it over, lift it up, fold it over, lift it up the 4th time and fold it over. And then I just take it and I plop it back in the bowl like this. That's the first way to stretch and fold. I'm going to show you a different method to do stretch and folds, which I use most of the time. It really helps keep your dough in the shape of a ball. So it would be you grab and pull over to the center, turn your bowl, grab, pull over to the center, turn your bowl, grab, turn, pull to the center, turn your bowl, and then you can do that 1 or more times, as much as you want, until you've got pretty much of a ball in your shape here. Now it's starting to stick, so what I would do is I would wet my hands again so that the dough doesn't stick. And now I can lift this ball of dough without it sticking, without any problems. I'm going to put this back down here, cover it up, and then in half an hour, I'm going to do the second stretch and fold. So we do 6 total stretch and folds. And later, I will show you more about how to shape the bread once those stretch and folds are finished. All right? Have a good day. Talk to you later. All right, so we have done 6 series of stretch and folds. That's 1 every half hour until we've completed 6. Now that I've done that, I'm going to take this bread and I'm going to put it on the counter upside down like this. Now this is what we call the first shaping. So I'm going to take this, pull it over, take this and pull it over, this corner, pull it over. So what I'm doing is really making a ball out of it. Pulling it over, pulling it over, pulling it over, and then just rolling it over like this. So you've got a round ball of dough, bread dough. Now I'm going to start to try to create tension in that ball. So very easily, I'm going to push and pull toward me. And I'll lift it up, put it back. Push, pull toward me. As I pull toward me, I'm folding the bottom under so that the ball lays on top of itself. This builds up tension. When it builds up tension, it creates a better rise when you bake the bread. But we're not going to bake the bread just yet. It's going to sit in the refrigerator overnight. And this is just the first shaping. So now that I've shaped it, I'm going to leave it on the counter here. I'm going to cover it with the bowl. And I'm going to let it rest for 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, we'll come back to it and we will do the final shaping before we put it in the loaf pan. This particular bread tonight is going to be cooked in a loaf pan, so it's going to be a longer roll that looks more like a longer loaf that looks more like the bread you would buy in the store. If we wanted to use a basket such as this, it would make a round loaf or a bouillet. But today we're going to make the banneton shaped bread, which is a longer loaf. All right, so we're back again. This ball of dough has rested underneath the glass bowl for 20 minutes. You can let it go 30 minutes if you want, or even longer, but I like 20 to 30 minutes. Once that's completed and the dough is relaxed, now I sprinkle it with white flour. So you want this side of the ball of dough to be covered in flour, and you want some flour around the outside as well, and I'll show you why. What we're going to do is we're going to lift this ball of dough and flip it over. So this powder, or this floured surface, will not stick to anything. So watch what we do. We take that powder that's around it and we push it underneath the ball a little bit, just lightly. And now we just flip it over onto its back. These are what I use to flip it with. So anyone planning on baking bread, I would recommend that you buy 2 of these. Makes the job a whole lot easier. Now this particular dough is sticky on the top. Now I don't wet my hands for this. I want my hands dry because I'm only going to handle it from underneath. So I'm going to take this dough and I'm going to start to stretch it out. And just do so gently because it's full of air right now. The air bubbles that have formed during the process. And so we don't want to destroy those. We can push it light. See how the top is sticky, but we want it to stay that way. We continue to stretch it a little. Stretch it out. Just continue to work it out. You're not hurting it in any way by stretching it. It's not sticking to your hands because the bottom has been floured. And now once it's opened and out, the job is fairly easy. You want to fold this like a book. So you're going to fold it in three. You're going to take this side, stretch it out, fold it over. Pull these sides out a little bit. And then you're going to take, I'll try to do this from this side. You're going to pull this side up and fold it over as well. And again, don't be afraid of this. You're not going to hurt it. So now you've got a long log of dough. Now I'm just going to roll it over with my hand so that the seam is up. Make sure it's secure. And you squeeze out any bubbles of air that have formed. And now this is sticking to the table lightly, so I'm going to pull from this end. We want to develop some tension in this bread. So we're going to gently roll it up. Continue to roll all the way. Building pressure as we go. And then when we get to the very end, we're going to lay it seam. The seam is on the bottom. We're going to lay it seam down on top of parchment paper. You can fold the ends over a little bit. So this is your uncooked loaf. It's not ready yet to bake. We're going to overnight it in the refrigerator. Now what I've done is I put a loaf pan in a plastic bag, and I'm going to take this ball of dough, and I'm going to lift it and set it gently into the loaf pan. I push down the paper so it's not going to stick to the top of the dough. And now it's ready to go into the refrigerator. So what we're going to do is leave it in the refrigerator. You seal up the plastic bag just like this. And we're going to allow this to ferment in the refrigerator anywhere from 12 to 24 hours, entirely up to you. You can leave it as long as 48 hours, I'm told, but the most I've left it is 18 to 24. And tomorrow, when we take this out and we're ready to start the baking process, we will show you the last video section on this. All right, so that's it, and have a good night. So it's been about 18 hours now since we finished the dough, and we put it in the refrigerator overnight, and we're going to bake it now. So you can see that it did rise quite a bit from the way it was before. About an hour ago, I started the oven up. You have to preheat your oven for about an hour because you really want it to be the right temperature. It should be 500 degrees inside the oven. And do not go by the oven thermostat or what it says on the front of your oven. Measure it, the temperature yourself, to be sure that the temperature is at least 500 degrees. After we put the bread in the oven, we're going to lower it to 450. But it's the high intense heat that is going to cause this bread to blow up and just look beautiful. So last night, or just, excuse me, this morning, I prepared some egg white and water wash, which I'm going to put on top of the bread. We just have to lift this bread out of the container because we're not going to bake it in that. Peel the sides back a bit. So you've got a beautiful loaf there. I'm going to just score it down the center. So we take a razor and we score it lightly down the center so that when that loaf expands in the oven, that will break open and the steam will have a way to get out. Now I'm going to take the egg wash and I'm going to cover the dough with egg wash. And today I've decided to use the bagel everything seasoning. You could use caraway seeds or poppy seeds or any kind of seeds that you care to use. The egg wash binds these seeds to the outside of the bread. If you didn't do that, the seeds would dry up and fall off. So that should be sufficiently coated. And I'm using a bagel, simple bagel mix, and we're going to sprinkle that all over the loaf. Trying not to get a ton of it on the floor. But do it generously because it gives the bread a nice flavor. Any kind of nuts or seasoning or anything gives the bread that added boost that makes it nice. All right, so now we've got a loaf of bread that's ready to go into the oven. All right, so we're going to get ready to bake the bread now. I have, depending on the shape of the bread, this is a loaf shape, so I have this kind of a clay container that I'm going to bake it in. But if it was a round loaf, I would bake it inside one of these. This has been preheated already to 500 degrees. All you have to do is lift from the side, set it down inside the hot container, being very careful not to burn yourself, ouch. And then from the oven, I'll take the top, the lid, and I'll put that on there. Burn myself on that one. Would you hand me the water spray? It's always a good idea. I should have remembered, but talking with you, I forgot, that before you put the lid on, you should really spray inside the container itself with water so that there's steam in there to build up heat and to cause that bread to explode. So now that I've done that, I'll put the top back on again. And we're ready to go in the oven. The oven is 500 degrees. We just take this, set it in the oven, and close the door right away. And then lower your temperature to 450. We're going to bake it for 1 hour at 450. All right, so our bread has been in the oven for an hour, and it's time to take it out. And for the unveiling, this is the best part of the whole process. And I always look forward to this because it always looks a little bit different. Are we ready? There you go, that's today's loaf. Now, what you gotta do with this is you take it off Take it out. You can lift it out from the corners of the parchment paper. Set it on top of the cooling rack. Slide it off. It's going to be hot, so don't burn yourself. Slide it off onto the cooling rack, and there you have a beautiful loaf of bread. Let cool for 2 hours. No cheating. And I forgot to mention before that if you want the round loaf, you use the Dutch oven. Not too many people have these clay ovens, but you can find them. This one was a gift from Mike. I'm not sure where he got it. All right, enjoy your day and start baking bread.